Hello, everyone. It's Frances Widdowson here. Welcome to the second episode of the Rational Space Disputations. And joining me today is one of my favorite colleagues, Mark Mercer. And Mark Mercer is the president. First of all, he's the president of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, which is an organization that both Mark and I are involved with. And as well, he is a philosophy professor, a very accomplished philosophy professor at St. Mary's University. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Francis.
Yes. And I think, so the format for people who haven't seen the first episode is for me to interview Mark, or to ask Mark some questions and try to get at the bottom of things, So hopefully have a slightly disputational character to it for the first hour. And then for the second hour, we will have Mark, the screens will be turned, and then Mark will ask me some questions for about an hour. And so that's the plan, so that we can have fairness in discussing things as well. There might have been some things that got, put out there in the first hour that Mark, takes issue with and wants to explore a little bit more deeply. So that's the plan, and it's an interesting format, and we'll see how it works this time around. So, Mark, I was wondering if you could just perhaps introduce yourself to the audience, say a little bit about yourself, say what you think are some of the interesting things you're involved in, and so on, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks. Yes, Francis. Mark Mercer, it's my name. I teach philosophy here in Halifax at St. Mary's University in Halifax. I've been here for over 20 years now, and then I had 10 years after my PhD where I was teaching on the road, taught in Calgary for a couple of years before Francis arrived. And I'm president of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, as Francis mentioned. I joined SAFS, I think it was 2006. I'm not sure, don't have to check my notes. Around 2006, I was brought onto the board around 2009 or 2010. And in 2015, I became the president, the fourth president of the society. And I'm going to have one more year after the May meetings. And then I'll step down from the presidency after 8 years. Things that matter to me. Well, certainly the university is something that matters to me. And I think that there are pressures on the university from both outside and within that are deflecting it away from its academic mission, which I take to be the dispassionate study of things. I take to be the academic mission of the university. And I think that in order to do that, the university has to be a certain way. And then I think there are some reasons why even people outside the university should be supporting a university of dispassionate inquiry with the sorts of structures that I think aid dispassionate inquiry. So those are some of my concerns in philosophy, but not in the central metaphysical parts of philosophy that I'm most interested in. I'm also have concerns about the nature of evaluative discussion, values and evaluation, and maybe Francis and I would talk a little bit about science and the philosophy of science. I think our views differ there. I'm anti-foundationalist and quite skeptical about things. I think Francis has a keener sense of the robust goodness of science than I do. And so that may be something that we'll talk about.
I think we should get into that, Mark.
Pardon me?
I think we should get into that. So that's it. That's an interesting thing to start on. So you talk about your philosophy, you're interested in the philosophy of science, yes. And you're more skeptical than me. Well, or that's you have a certain skepticism about science? Is this what you're saying?
Well, you know, I love science. I think science is tremendously important. I wish that we in our society were more scientifically literate and scientifically capable than we are. I think science scares many people, but I do think that you know, scientific inquiry. I don't think that there is really such a thing as the method of science, and I don't think that. So I'm thinking of ways in which I believe I differ from you in our understanding or appreciation of science. I don't think that science comes with very many commitments about how the world is. For instance, I don't think that it's part of science to be anti-spiritual, right? Where I think, you know, inquiry into things. Here are
so just one sec, Mark. I got to stop you there.
Sure.
So what do you mean by spiritual?
The idea that there are objects and events that are non-physical, that intervene in the physical realm. I take it there's a spiritualism in explanation in a lot of, in many different cultures. Will explain phenomenon by adverting to the intentions of unseen beings, gods, for instance. I don't think that a science that mentions gods and the rest is ruled out as science. Right? I don't think that's criterion that scientific investigation be entirely within the physical realm. That it doesn't mention these things. I take it that's one of your objections to including Aboriginal lore in science classes.
But are you do you see spiritual as being supernatural?
Well, supernatural, sure. Spiritual, supernatural, yeah.
So
divine.
in your view, if have I got this correct? In your view, scientific methods are not in contradiction with supernatural explanations, or is that not characterizing that?
Well, no, I think that a supernatural explanation of some phenomenon can be evaluated, can be investigated scientifically, and it's not a foregone conclusion that this explanation that draws on supernatural entities, supernatural forces, or whatever, is false. It's not a foregone conclusion that science will show it to be false. As a matter of fact, the movements in science have tended to cast out the supernatural, the teleological, the purposive, all of these things. But I think this is a process of theory construction and a gain in understanding, right? But that some lore about the ways of the world invokes supernatural forces, entities, whatever, does not make it non-scientific. Does not make it false. The question is, well, here's another thesis on the table. So let's evaluate it using all the methods, all the techniques at our disposal. Right?
Okay.
So I think
but there's a claim, just so there can be a claim such as, you know, the gods created thunder, like God, the thunder is because the gods are angry. That was I guess a hypothesis of the Greeks.
Yeah.
That when gods got angry, thunder. Anyway, so we through many thousands of years we investigated and so on. We found that thunder was some kind of physical process and so on. So that was then falsified. That hypothesis was falsified.
Yes, yeah.
But I don't know, like, even if we hadn't falsified it, we hadn't found the other reason as to why thunder happened, that
Mhm.
wouldn't have meant that we had falsified supernaturalism.
Run that by me again.
So like the specific manifestation of supernaturalism can be
Yeah.
falsified, I guess. But the general kind of assumption of the existence of supernaturalism as far as I know, cannot be falsified.
Oh, sure. Well, no, but we can have excellent reason for rejecting
Mhm.
that there is a supernatural, that there is a divine, that there is a spiritual. We can have excellent reason for rejecting these things.
Yeah.
But nothing is ever totally closed. If someone appears and presents a theory, and that theory involves appeal to entities that we're happy to describe as supernatural, well, again, if we want to show that it's false, we have to investigate that particular theory. I mean, if we're being scientific, we don't have to do anything. We can say, oh, it involves spirits, so I'm not going to pay attention to it because I got better things to do.
Yes.
But if we want to engage it, we have to engage it in its own terms, try to discover what observable consequences would follow were the theory true, bring about the initial conditions, see if those consequences follow. If they don't, then we have reason for thinking that there's something wrong with the theory somewhere.
But we often hear in discussions about this question that it's called, I believe, and you would know this more than me because you're a philosopher, it's called the God of the gaps explanation. So,
Oh yeah, these aren't this is
but
not
you see what you're
explanatory.
talking about is different than the God. So for people who don't know, if you can't explain something, you say, well, God did it.
Yeah, yeah.
But what you're talking about is something, I'm just curious about why, like, do you think that there's a plausible reason why the supernatural exists?
Well, no, I don't. I deny that the supernatural exists. But again, I take
Okay,
that to be,
okay, so that's that. So that's common ground then. So both you and I deny that the
Mhm.
or don't accept the existence of the supernatural.
Right. But I wouldn't rule out of science class theories that invoke the concept of the supernatural. Right. So any objection one might have to including indigenous lore in a science class, I think, can't be that indigenous lore posits spiritual entities, posits supernatural things, posits final causes, or something like that. That can't be a ground for excluding it from science classes.
So
But I take it you do think that that's at least some reason for holding that it's.
I guess I'm open, like I would be, my first reaction would be, for example, I don't think that creationism should be included in the biology class.
Well, why
But
not?
but it seems that you might.
Yeah.
You might,
It's
might be
again,
open to
it's the part of my commitment to academic freedom, right, has to do with a commitment not to rule ideas out of court on the basis that they fail some criterial test. So if some professor says, well, let's discuss creation science, let's discuss intelligent design. Here's a thesis. The thesis is that yes, animals, types of animals evolve, but only within their own genera. So for instance, there was a common ancestor of all the cats and a common ancestor of all the dogs, but no common ancestor of the cats and the dogs. Right, and here's why. Creatures breed true according to their type, and the type is the genera. And so here we have this thesis. A large scale theory. Well, go out into the world and attempt to find instances that would refute that theory. This is the method of science, to take the hypothesis, to generate testable conditions, go in and create conditions where you can test the implications of the theory for observation. But if a biology teacher wants to do that, that's fine. Bring it into the classroom. If a biology teacher says, here are some theories about botany from our local Algonquin peoples. Let's discuss them. Well, great. Again, the discussion wouldn't be in a science class. The discussion wouldn't be, here's how some people understand the natural world. It's, here's an understanding of the natural world. Let's investigate it. Let's see if it, let's see where it throws insight onto the natural world and where it doesn't, where it's true and where it's false.
But how
So
does one investigate? Like, I understand how one can invest, and that's actually, part of this kind of skeptical inquirer kind of type of area. Like Skeptical Inquirer's a magazine, and they kind of take these claims about the supernatural and go and basically use a scientific method to investigate.
Yeah.
So I understand how that kind of debunks the specific kind of claim. But when you're saying that, God, for example, can just do stuff with no, one day he does it this way, another, and there's no rhyme nor reason to it.
Yeah.
Because it's just what God does. I don't understand how one can investigate that particular kind of way of, assume that way of assuming how things happen, how that is scientifically investigated.
Well, I don't know if we
more
want
of a
to call it
philosophical kind of.
Yeah, I don't want to call it scientific, but it doesn't matter. I don't know. It doesn't matter what the label is. Here's a way of attempting to understand the world, but it may not be a very good one. Compare it to others, right? Investigate it along. We're never really testing a theory against the world. We're testing the theory by looking at the world and against other theories, other ways of thinking. If we have a way of predicting and controlling the course of events, right, it does a superior job of that, then that's reason for going for it rather than the other. But it's always that loose. Right, it's always that open,
Yes.
Or at least I would want it to be that.
My own personal, I'm open, because I do agree with you that I'm a bit nervous about just ruling things out, especially, for example, let's say we have a biologist who's been hired, they're teaching evolution in the biology class, and then for some reason, through their investigations, they found that creationism is a very, very useful explanation. I don't think that's likely to happen, because I think, there was a progressive development with evolutionary theory, but many would argue that, okay, that biology professor should be fired because they are an incompetent and they, are no longer fulfilling their academic types of obligations. I would be very, very nervous about that, because for me, that would open up the door for anyone else finding something new that they've discovered through honest investigation, which is now seen to be, kind of suspect professionally. What I would argue is that we should really, this is kind of the time to bring in other biologists, have open discussion about this to kind of try to sort this out so that a new consensus can be kind of reached on the matter. Would be my that would be my concern. But I have a little bit of difficulty with what you're talking about, in that, there is well, maybe you don't agree. Do you think there's been progress in knowledge?
In the sense that we understand more things and understand things more deeply than some other people have.
Yeah, historically. So it's
historically, maybe not me.
But historically, humans like 500 years ago understood less than humans, 100 years.
Well,
like
sure.
500 years ago.
Say about a certain phenomena. Well, we were talking about thunder and lightning.
Yes.
Meteorological phenomena, I take
Yes.
it, are much
Yes.
better understood these days
Yes.
than they were 100 years ago.
Yes.
That the theories that our meteorologists are working with are more explanatory, more integrated. There was consilience with other disciplines, geology, biology, and the like. So our the degree of prediction and control that these theories afford is much greater than the theories that were current 100 years ago, and that speaks to the depth and breadth of understanding that's come the way of the meteorologists in 100 years.
Yeah.
Phenomena such as plate tectonics. I was a school student in the 1960s when plate tectonics was all the rage, and one of my science teachers was, just really keen about this, and wonderful. And you think this is just 60 years ago, right? So the understanding of the Earth and physical processes on the Earth was revolutionized only 60 years ago. And what this has opened up, by way of understanding the world is just immense. Geologists 65 years ago knew much, much less than geologists 60 years ago did. Just because of this one very broad, engrossing theory that related phenomena that seemed to be disparate and gave an explanation. So I mean, this is progress. If one wants to understand how the world is, how the world works, the forces that are responsible for mountain building and oceans and all the rest, well, great progress has been made. Yes.
Yes. So if we are to accept that, then the problems with, teaching like more primitive, I guess, understandings of things. Like you have students who you're trying to give them the best education that you possibly can, the most developed knowledge that exists. And yet
okay,
what's that?
This might be somewhere else where we disagree.
So you don't think that? No? So you
well, first, let me make sure. I don't think anyone's in doubt of this, but let me just make sure I'm not speaking as the president of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. I'm speaking my own views.
Sure, yeah.
And there, in a group like the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, where we're a group of people who like to discuss things for one, but we also have a reforming imperative to the group. We can agree on the principles, right, without agreeing on why we should agree on the principles and the rest. So we agree on academic freedom, but many of us have different ideas about why it's important. But let me ask you, what do you take supplying our students, supplying people with the best education consists in? It seems to me, and you're saying something like, well, have them understand and accept up-to-date theories.
Well, this is where I start to get a bit uneasy because I'm nervous of any acceptance of things on the basis of, the sage telling you this is the. So I think critical thinking is a major part of providing the best education that you possibly can. So always kind of be helping students to think through the critical thinking kind of processes, which seems to be at odds with saying, this has been decided, now you're just gonna basically learn this.
Right.
And I guess that's kind of what we're getting at a little bit here, is that, like, okay, plate tectonics is has progressed, is a progressive development in understanding over whatever the previous
steady state geology.
Yeah. It's possible that is actually wrong, plate tectonics, and it was the earlier one that is actually true. It's just that there was some bizarre kind of thing that lined up that got everyone on a new direction, which was actually a blind alley, but we didn't realize that until, 5 minutes from now. And we wouldn't want to be preventing the person who said, hey, wait a minute here, it was actually correct what we thought, 20 years ago. This is kind of the difference between time and evolution. So time is just the scale of, minute after minute after minute. Evolution is actually a greater complexity, a process of greater complexity that's happening. And sometimes things are earlier in time and are of a greater complexity, but get destroyed through various power plays, or just maybe mistakes that are made.
Or not. I mean, in evolution, the naked mole rat, for instance, has lost, it's a mammal, but it's cold-blooded. Lost the ability to thermoregulate itself. But it lives in an environment where the temperature is the same, so you don't need that, right? So at any rate, I
find these are very interesting kinds of things, but this is kind of I guess the problem is having quacks teaching people a bunch of stuff that are obviously untrue.
Good. Yeah, but let's back up a step or two before we come to the quacks, because that is a problem. I think that's an objection to our views. The objection might be we're too tolerant of quackery. Those people who are really keen on academic freedom might not have the resources to deal with the charlatans, the quacks, the mountebanks. And the like. But first of all, what is it that we're doing as academics? I don't think, people talk about teaching, and I don't like that. I don't think I teach. I'm certainly not teaching my colleagues, right? I might be informing them of this or that in the process of discussion. I don't think I'm teaching my students either. We're gathered together to investigate disputatiously the things of the world. So I'm offering this invitation to my students, and something like an example of how one goes about that, how one tries to discover a philosophical problem, work on the philosophical problem. I'd like the same sort of thing in science class, in literature, where we're attempting to interpret and appreciate works of art. We get together and do this because we enjoy it, because we like it, and we find that doing it in company, doing it with people, is a lot of fun too. And not only that, it helps us because others can criticize us, can expand on ideas, offer alternatives. The job of trying to think things through, trying to understand them, goes much better in community. So you take the students. The students are aspiring intellectuals. They aspire to have moral and intellectual autonomy, or at least that's the assumption. If they don't enjoy it, they're always free to leave, and at least they've had a sample of it. So very few people have. I think it'd be better if more people were brought together in an intellectual community to try to live the life of the mind and find out whether they like it. So what we're doing as academics is living the life of the mind, and what we're doing as teachers, as academics, as classroom instructors, are inviting our students also to enjoy the life of the mind. We want to understand how things are, that's for sure, but we also enjoy the process of coming to understand how things are. But that itself, the process, is an object of inquiry, right? We can disagree with each other about what is the process, or what are the best processes of coming to understand how things are. So, I mean, in a sense, there's no firm ground. There's nowhere we can all put our feet down and say, this is where we are, and let's begin from there.
So just because I'm still a little bit unclear as to your teaching. So you say that you're not involved in you're not teaching. So you see teaching as being different than this kind of life of the mind, disputation, those kinds of things. What's making you make that kind of distinction, I guess.
Okay, well, first of all, I overspoke. I don't mean I'm not teaching.
We're just going to reduce your salary.
I go into the classroom and some teaching might occur and some learning might occur.
Okay.
But that's incidental to what we're doing. If I happen to be teaching, well, that's just at the moment how best, in my judgment, to go about inviting people to engage in the life of the mind. And some students are learning about this or that. Here's a philosophical thesis, here's an argument for it, here's an objection to it. They might be learning that in the sense that someone says, well, what's the objection to this view? Oh, here's one. And well, I learned that from my professor. So this is going to happen. But that's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is we have this philosophical problem. Let's go take some important steps towards resolving it, towards solving it. And that's what we're there to do. Now, in doing that, people are going to pick up skills, and they might even pick up information that we might even want to call knowledge if it's well enough based. But that's not the point of it. The point is merely to engage with the materials at hand. And I would hope that that's true not just in philosophy, but in academic work generally. Here's a problem and it intrigues me. I want to make some headway on this problem. I want to understand, and also I want to enjoy the processes of understanding. So that's what I take we're doing in the classroom. It should not matter to the professor what the students believe. The students are, it's not a triumph of university teaching if students come out knowing more than they went in. And in the sense knowing, having justified true beliefs about the thing. The goal is just the endeavor itself, right? So anyway, that's my view of the academic mission, individually with colleagues, with students. So if that's the case, there's nothing wrong with our students coming out of the class understanding how species evolve by means of natural and sexual selection. That's great. But what we had were some problems of understanding the natural world, and we were investigating ideas with regard to that. And that's what it was all about.
Yes. And this is getting a little esoteric, but I'm just sort of like, how do you know like that you've accomplished things? Like, or is it just doing it? Like if you're working with your students, you're having this what is it, living the life of the mind, you're doing this, like, is there some kind of objective outcome that could be better or worse? Or is it just kind of a really process-oriented thing that you're seeing?
Process-oriented. It can be better or worse, maybe not objective.
Okay.
I think of it like this. There are standards of excellence that we attempt to meet. And when we meet those standards of excellence, we're attaining the goods internal to the practice of investigation, say philosophical investigation, philosophical thought. An insight, an interesting objection, a well-written paper that lays out the problem. Right, these are the accomplishments. And with those accomplishments, we have a profound sense of joy or a sense of accomplishment. And that's what we're in it for. And we can always be fooled, right? We can always think that we can always think that we've attained some insight only, and in fact we haven't. We've mischaracterized the phenomenon or whatever. And that could potentially be exposed by the next person we talk to or next paper we read or whatever. So there's never any real knowing that you've met the standards of excellence and attained the goods internal to the in terms of the practice. But there are better and worse reasons for thinking that you've managed it. Right? When you bring more phenomena under control of fewer concepts, this is satisfying explanatorily. So for that moment, even if it turns out that you're wrong about these things, I mean, for that moment, there's that accomplishment and that feeling of accomplishment.
So
Students in the classroom.
yeah, so I think, you know, because I got to be honest, I'm finding this a little bit too, you know, at a too abstract of a level.
Okay.
And I just wanted to, because I know that we've had this disagreement before, or at least I think that we've put this forward. I believe you do not accept the definition of knowledge as being justified true belief. Is that correct?
To be really esoteric about it, I think definition is absolutely the wrong. I don't care about definitions about how words are used. But yes, some would say that if Sally knows that P, then Sally is well justified in believing that P and P is true, right? Now, I accept that. I think if one knows that P, then P is true. One believes that P and one has a very good justification for believing that P, right? All the evidence favors P, no evidence is against P, all of that. I don't think we're ever in a position to judge whether someone actually knows something. I mean, this is what knowledge would be. Is there any knowledge? I'm not sure there is. I think
well, I would argue that knowledge is the kind of best guess that we have at a particular time. So our knowledge that we have today is not necessarily true.
Well, you see, this is why I prefer the term understanding to knowledge.
Like it's possible that our evidence, that something that we have a tremendous amount of evidence for, and we say, okay, this is knowledge.
Yeah.
Tomorrow we find that a huge amount of that was just smoke and mirrors, and that was not really the case. Yeah. So it's possible that which is strongly justified, has strong justification today, that justification for whatever reason could be weakened tomorrow. Right. And therefore it may no longer be considered to be knowledge. Right. But at the same time, there is a reality that does exist outside of ourselves. Yeah. That's the assumption. Is that something that you accept?
Yes. Oh, sure. The proposition is either true or false. And we attempt to determine whether it's true or false. And I'm satisfied that it's true. And then tomorrow it turns out that there's evidence that I take as evidence that it's false. Yeah, so I think that's right. I think that there are truths and there are falsehoods. The task is to organize, to discover which ones are true and to organize them into theories.
Okay. And knowledge, how does knowledge come into that?
Again, I don't use the word knowledge, but
okay.
But if you want to use knowledge and say that it's not contradictory to speak of contingent knowledge or knowledge. I think
knowledge is always contingent, so that's my
yeah, that's fine. So there's just a verbal difference between us, right? Okay. I want to say, well, if it's contingent or conjectural, it's not knowledge. Okay. And then that forces me to the conclusion there is no knowledge.
Okay, Mark.
But if you want to say, well, we're going to use the term knowledge for our best attested theories, and of course they are conjectural. Of course it's provisional on. It's provisional to our situation. We might find some disconfirming evidence tomorrow, then that's okay. Call it knowledge. I like to call them understandings.
Okay,
'Cause I
okay.
don't hear,
So
necessarily.
we've used up quite a lot of my time questioning, Mark, and I don't want to miss this question
Okay.
because I think this is very, very important to our current, both the situation of you and me and Wendy Mesley, the case of Wendy Mesley, and a number of other cases, and Lieutenant Duval, I believe her name is, at University of Ottawa, and I can't remember the woman's name at Concordia, who was teaching film theory. And this is a big issue now that is coming, which is the use mention distinction,
Right.
especially with respect to some of the most dangerous words that currently exist. And I'm just going to use this, I'm going to mention this word right now because I can't avoid it. And this is the word quote unquote nigger, which is now a massive issue that exists across Canada, and probably certainly in the English speaking world, it's going to be a major problem at universities.
Well,
So
it's a very strange thing, yes.
yeah, so what is this all about in your view, Mark? Like, what's going on with us, this kind of prohibition that is on mentioning, and how does this relate to the use of words?
Well, I don't know what's going on. I'm appalled by what's going on, but no, I don't entirely understand it. It seems it's just bizarre to me. But I mean, here's what's bizarre to me: that there are people who are engaged in inquiry, interpretation, about all these wonderful things that we're engaged in, but who receive the sound or the visual imprint of a word in such a way that it makes their life hell. And that's got to be a disability, and I can't. I mean, why would anyone, want to be that way? Now, I imagine, human psychological weakness is legendary. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can turn people one way or another. But why would someone think that even though I love living the life of the mind, I'm going to rule out of bounds certain talk? So I think that, in order to be candid and forthright and to talk about things that matter to us, there can't be any prohibitions on what we say or how we say it. If there are prohibitions on what we say or how we say it, then that will prevent us potentially from bringing into the conversation things that we think are relevant to it.
Yes. Well, I guess there's two possibilities in terms of what you're saying. One is the kind of the disability aspect, that it actually is a very debilitating thing for people to see or hear this word when it is, interestingly, said by a non-Black person. So if a Black person says it, they don't have the same. And in fact, they can actually say the word, being a Black person, they can say the word themselves. I was actually at a meeting where a student was giving a presentation and they were castigating a professor who had mentioned this word in a class in a completely anti-racist context. But then they themselves mentioned the word right there, like in the presentation, and it was just accepted by everyone. Well, no one objected to this kind of thing that was happening. So the question is that an actually deeply felt thing that this person has, or is it, as I have said, race hustling? And race hustling.
I don't know. I don't want to have an opinion. I don't know. I've read some things. Some things seem plausible to me. I haven't investigated One claim, right, is that there's a proprietariness, and everyone is, wants to own something, is proud of ownership. Right, so it's just a holding this word as the property of a certain group of people who then might be able to lend it to other people, if they want, but they have control over it. That might be psychologically satisfying. So on the one hand, you have the proprietariness of it, and I think this ties into ideas of appropriation of voice and cultural appropriation and things like that, where ideas, patterns, colors, whatever, are owned by people, and one has to respect their rights to what they own. So we have that on the one side, and on the other side, the idea that the hearing the word is debilitating when it's spoken by someone who doesn't own it, who's not part of the group that has the proprietary interest in it. But these are explanations that I don't know. Any of them could be true. They all could be false. I don't know. I just think that the upshot is deforming of our endeavors as academics. If the upshot is to remove words from our vocabularies, then it should be resisted. Resisted certainly within the universities, and I would like the society generally to be more like a university, rather than the university being more like the general society. Banning words or taking umbrage at people who mention or use the word, and again, I include use of the word as well as mention. I think is anti-intellectual, anti-academic. It works against openness and candor. It puts topics out of the reach of discussion, not just views on topics out of the reach of discussion, but views should never be out of reach of discussion. So I think it's a horrible thing that so many administrators and others with control are holding that it's disrespectful of people to mention the word nigger or whatever words in the context of academic inquiry or care of the university, classrooms, whatever.
So that you said that it's disrespectful.
Well, that's
to have
the thesis, right? That's the theory.
So because they would say that it's disrespect, like people who are objecting to this.
Yeah.
Say that it's disrespectful for people to, just mention this word, which they find to be very upsetting and so on in their context, when they're there. Why is it that you think that it's disrespectful to just make that assumption that you shouldn't?
Well, I don't think it's disrespectful. It's not disrespectful at all. I think it'd be disrespectful to measure your words to your audience. I mean,
Yes.
that's disrespectful.
And why do you think
Did it
is?
sound like I was saying it was disrespectful to say?
No, I thought I was trying to, I agree. I agree with you on this question. I was just trying to figure out, I was trying to get you to articulate why you think it's disrespectful to measure your words like that and to prevent, like when you think, like,
sure.
why is it that you think that?
Yeah, it's disrespectful to measure your words because the people with whom you're interacting are morally and intellectually autonomous. They can make up their own minds. They can.
Yes.
So it would be withholding your opinions, your views, withholding the personality with which you express your views.
Yes.
And that's to treat them as incapable of engaging with you honestly or candidly.
Yes. And there are like people make the assumption, or at least people I've had, because I've been involved with this issue as well, just trying to explain myself. And I've found numerous Black people who completely understand
Mhm.
that mentioning is different than using, and sometimes words can be used in a manner that's not racist, even if it is the word itself often is deployed in that way. And I point to that, but then it's like they don't seem to matter. Those Black people who think that, to the people who are trying to clamp down on, they're trying to make, I guess, non-Black people feel nervous and to make assumptions about Black people before they use or mention words, which I find is very disturbing. Like it's kind of creating this really artificial racial division that doesn't even really exist. Like it does exist amongst some segments of that population, but it's not a blanket assumption that can be made about it.
Yeah, well, that's right. But my concerns are always within the realm of the academic. I mean, what is it about, or what policies, what practices, what customs support the academic mission, and what customs policies, inhibitions, whatever, are against the academic mission. Now, one might say, I mean, critics of our view would say, well, the academic mission is valuable, of course, but it's not the only thing that's valuable. And indeed, there are things that are more valuable. And so when something more valuable is put at risk by open, free, candid discussion, it's open, free, candid discussion that has to take the back seat, right? So this is the view that we have to address. We say, well, look, if our goal is to investigate the things of the world, to talk candidly with each other about our ideas about them, so that we might come to understand them better, form better, deeper, broader understandings, then nothing can be off the table with regard to views, topics, ways of expressing oneself, even. And it was yes, we can agree with that, but then look at the harm or the damage that you going about your business as an academic can cause. And I think it's analogous to the idea that if we were to discover if we were to discover certain things about, say, nuclear fission, that would enable people to make bombs, right? And so let's take that off the table, because the risks to other things that matter to us of discussing it is just too great. So that it's analogous. It's analogous to that. Analogous to the idea that investigating as biologists or sociologists or anthropologists ethnic differences, sexual differences, racial differences, can have or risks more social harm than social good. So even though within the academic context, everything is to be investigated, and all hypotheses might be are permitted to be spoken and investigated, still maybe the overseer should say, well, don't go there. Don't go to that area. And I want to say, well, no, our academic mission is central to us, and because it's central to us, no words, vile, ugly, words that are associated with vile, ugly ideas, doesn't matter. We may speak them because we're going about our business.
Yes. And it seems to me too, I'm just thinking of Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and this kind of harm, this sort of idea of harm, and the perhaps, as you were kind of mentioning about, people being sort of disabled, like almost seeing it as a disability, that if you hear a particular word, like just the word itself, the imprint, like not even, it's obvious that you're not mentioning it, in some context, which is got some hateful intent or anything, but just seeing the shapes of those letters on a page, this causes you to have this, disturbance. Well, they would say, well, the way you get over that is you subject yourself to that over and over again until you lose that response.
Right.
Right.
Now,
Which we're actually preventing people from kind of grappling with this,
yeah.
so that they can become actually more engaged intellectually and not have this disability that's plaguing them.
Well, that might be right, but except maybe the last part of what you said, that's not my argument. That's not.
No, I was just saying, like, you mentioned
yeah.
it as one of the arguments that has been like that there's this kind of, this harm that's being caused, like that one could argue that is harm causing someone to have this distress.
Yeah.
Because they see these shapes of these letters on a book, they accidentally go to the library, go to the area where Pierre Valiere's book is, and they pull it out, and they've had this shock, that is, and because they know that he was a white author and he has dared to do this, and they're now in this traumatized state, like that. This seems to me to be, this seems to me to be an exaggeration of what's going on here. Still, if it were true that was the case, then they should be, kind of trying to expose themselves to this more, so that they could get over this response that they have to it.
Well, maybe, but that's not my view. I mean, it's not my view in the sense that I'm agnostic. Lukianoff and Haidt might be right. You might be right about race hustling. I don't have to have an opinion one way or the other. My concern is just with the academic mission and the academic ethos of the institutions in which we pursue the academic mission. So if it very well might be true that the best way to handle the shock of seeing a word unawares is to acclimatize yourself to it. Very well, but even if that's false, even if it's the case that seeing particular words or knowing that people have attitudes that you find despicable causes you distress and harm, still that's the cost of having an institution like a university. Now, so I take it that that the university then is for people who value very highly the academic mission. Now, they might value highly other things as well, so they might be sensitive to ideas, discussions, whatever, in the academic realm because of other values they hold. But this happens to us. This happens to us all the time. That we're faced with something that, from one perspective, is very unpleasant. But because we're engaged in some task, we buck ourselves up and continue with whatever that task is. So it might be the case that some person both finds the sight of that word so very shocking, and yet at the same time is a committed intellectual. In that case, they're going to choose, out of their commitment to the intellectual endeavor, not to attempt to censor or sanction those who speak that word, or who use that word. From their perspective as intellectuals, it's something they would put up with, and it's putting up with it because there's other aspects of their selves, of their identities that are affected. So the Lukianoff Haidt line may very well be true, right? So, but it's no part of my argument.
Yes. Anyway, Mark. So we have had an hour. You did slip in a bit of questioning of me, I saw earlier. You went out of turn, but that's fine, because we can't just be rigid in our methods here. So now we have the hour that you have now to ask me some questions. And I should explain to our audience that Mark's camera and his screen are in separate locations. So if you see him gazing in the opposite direction, he might need to do that once in a while, or I'm not sure how comfortable you're feeling speaking into the void, Mark, but I'm just like people know, if you see Mark's head turned, then he's trying to gauge my I guess how truthful I'm being or something through my facial expression. But anyway, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Mark, and feel free to ask me anything. Ask me anything. I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer just due to my current situation, but I'll turn it over to you.
Well, we'll carry on some of the same topics. What are the grounds of your skepticism towards or objections to indigenization initiatives?
Yes. Well, this is now a major area of.
I'm going to turn to look at Frances now.
Yes. So indigenization, my objection generally to indigenization is the aspects of it that the university is taking a position. So that's the first thing, is that it's not about individuals deciding that they want to indigenize things themselves. That's up to them. That's their academic freedom. My objection was when the university actually took a position and made declarations that the university was going to do this. Some of these things were not very controversial, such as, bringing various aspects of indigenous culture into the university, such as artwork is a good example. So, when I was at UBC wandering around there a couple of years ago, I noticed, wow, there's a lot of indigenous artwork from the local area, from the local indigenous groups that is kind of part of UBC. And I could see why people might want to say that about Mount Royal, that we don't have enough, representation of the kind of artistic features at the university. This is not objectionable. And as well, assisting indigenous students in various ways. But that was pretty much all being done already. What indigenization was really about was trying to impose what was called indigenous ways of knowing into the curriculum. And in fact, the Indigenous Strategic Plan at Mount Royal, I'm not sure what they say at other universities, was that we respect and value indigenous ways of knowing. And I think
before we get that, can we back up just a little bit? I'm wondering about we will talk about indigenous ways of knowing, but I want to get to your position first of all about artwork, because you said it's not objectionable for the university to bring in art that is meant to be representative of indigenous culture. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I can understand why people would put that forward, and I don't see why we shouldn't have indigenous artwork, just like we have all other, whatever. I don't know how the university makes decisions about what pieces of artwork it's going to have.
Well, aren't there? Yeah, because I think it's the same thing, right? Isn't it? If it's an order from on high to the people who curate art at the university. I think, does Mount Royal have an art gallery?
We sort of have some installations of various, like, I don't think we actually have an art gallery room, but we have various attempts to have areas where we exhibit along a wall, for example, like that. So that exists, yeah, right. But not an actual room.
Yeah, I would hope that the curator at the university is concerned for aesthetic values overall, and that a work of art is by an indigenous person is neither here nor there, right, from the point of view of.
Well, then there's the other thing too. If a person who's not indigenous is painting in the style of like, for example, Norval Morrisseau, you know, would that be indigenization to have that style, which is known to have this indigenous origin?
Yeah.
Or like,
Well,
that's a little bit murky as well, but
well,
you know.
let's talk about that, but I think that's a separate topic. That's not what
Okay.
so you're saying, well, a central objection I have to indigenizing the university is that it's the university taking a position. It's not academics who, being enlightened by critical discussion and critical evaluation of their own practices, have said, well, my academic tastes are narrow. There's stuff here and there that I should be talking about, and some of it comes from indigenous people, and bring it into into the courses. But then exactly the same thing is happening, I think, with regard to art on the walls, and you aren't, but you don't have an objection.
Well, I'm not
choosing for the institution to say it's not aesthetic values that matter to us. It's representing cultures or styles or peoples, and so our art is going to reflect the representations of the different people, or it's going to be part of the reconciliation of the universities with Aboriginal First Nations Canadians. But it seems to me that the cases are analogous. So
well,
I would
they are and they aren't. They are and they aren't. So they are in the sense that, should the university be making decisions on the basis of, we've got to have more of group X represented. So there's that. So, so that's the first thing. And maybe that's not good either. I hadn't really thought about I'm not really a person who thought that was my purview to determine what kind of artwork the university has. So I wasn't concerned about it. But one thing I am concerned about is the academic character of the curriculum.
Right.
The curriculum should have the decisions that are made on the curriculum should be done on the basis of academic criteria, not political criteria. And I think indigenization is a purely political criteria. Now, it's probably the case that the artwork is also being done according to political criteria, but I'm not. That's not something that really gets my blood, my blood boiling. Which is the academic aspect of the curriculum. It is something that is very much of a concern to mine. So I haven't. I could possibly be persuaded that art, like, we should have a more aesthetic oriented approach.
Well, I would commend that that you bring that into consideration as well, because again, it's the university and the university environment, setting it up neither as aesthetics or as intellectual inquiry, but representing groups of people. It is the same thing, and it means the university in both ways.
Like, I think that any kind of this pandering, I consider it to be pandering. I generally feel a little bit, and to be honest, I saw that, like, because people are always saying, I don't want it to make it seem like I'm just against it because I'm a difficult person, I guess. Like, I'm willing to concede some things. Now, whether I should concede on the artwork or not is a matter of debate, but I see some things as being, well, it's not, that seems to me to be innocuous. Maybe it's not, but there are some aspects that are one could argue are innocuous, but the indigenous way of knowing, the respecting and the valuing indigenous ways of knowing is not innocuous. And it is already.
What are indigenous ways of knowing? I mean, so the one objection is that this is top down, that professors are being ordered, and departments are required to hire people who have particular views about Aboriginal ways of knowing. But the second is that just the idea of Aboriginal ways of knowing.
Yeah, well, I don't think that they're ways of knowing. So I think it's a misnomer. And what they're really talking about, well, some of it is ways of knowing, but it's not indigenous. It's local. So local ways of knowing. So that's what part of the indigenous ways of knowing is. So that is actually a ways of knowing, a way of knowing. It's just not indigenous, because anyone who lives in an area for a long period of time comes to an understanding of that particular environment much more than someone who's not living in that area. So that's just what's called local knowledge. But then there is the spiritual beliefs aspect, and other kind of not rigorous ways of trying to understand things. So we're currently encountering this with the memories of indigenous people. So this is a big problem now with a major area that I'm become involved in, which is the claims about the unmarked graves in especially Kamloops, the Kamloops residential school, which is memories that people have. And those memories are not very reliable. But people seem to say, because it's an indigenous memory, and that is their way of knowing, that should not really be regarded, like, should not really be questioned. It should just be accepted, because this is an indigenous way of knowing. And because we are supposed to respect and value indigenous ways of knowing, then that means we're going to accept, highly implausible stories about the Kamloops residential school. So that's a memory. So that's not really the supernatural aspect. It's just not very rigorous. And then we get into the various supernatural types of explanations that people are putting forward, which, I don't think, and that's not about studying those beliefs that people have, which we do in the university, which is an academic endeavor. Religious studies is a good example of this. But it's not that. It's not an anthropological or a religious studies kind of way of approaching it. It's that must be accepted as a valid way of understanding things in the university. And this kind of dictate is going to corrode the sort of the academic disciplines, making these demands on people, especially when they're done, as you said, by the university itself. Like that's kind of given additional weight to these kinds of demands, which, otherwise it would have just been, in my own view, a slightly flaky kind of part of the academy, which has kind of been there for a while now. But now this flaky part of the academy is kind of seized hold of the machinery of the institution and is now bludgeoning everyone who questions it. So like it's become much, much worse than it was, 10 years ago that we used to see this kind of stuff going on.
So you said the ways of knowing aren't valid. But do you think there are valid ways of knowing?
Yes. And
Okay.
that is, scientific ways of knowing are valid.
Yeah. I don't think there aren't ways of knowing. Like there are,
Ways of
psychological.
understanding. So would you accept the word understand?
No.
No.
There are ways of understanding. I think there are psychological mechanisms by which people come to their understandings. And I don't think that by calling it an understanding, one's calling it true. Right. So, we said there are false understandings. You got it all wrong. You misunderstood rather than understood. I don't think there are either. I don't think there's non-indigenous way of understanding and indigenous way of understanding, or ways of understanding, two I've seen. Either there are innumerable ways of understanding, or the idea of ways of understanding just doesn't make any sense. And I tend to go for the second. I think fashion your beliefs and your theories as you will, and put them up for discussion, and anyone who wishes to criticize them may, and you don't have to pay attention to those who criticize them if you got better things to do. If there's other, but it's all there.
Yeah.
So I don't, the idea of trying to find an indigenous way of knowing, I think, is just as misguided as trying to discover the scientific method, what the scientific method is.
No, I don't think I can.
Either of
So
them.
first of all, the language as a very ways of knowing, ways, this kind of thing. I would never use that language myself because I find it's, I don't know, it reeks of postmodernism, I guess, is what.
Okay, what was the language that reeks of postmodernism?
This ways, like this kind of ways, like that kind of thing. It's like it's got this vague kind of what exactly is the way, like a way, and like a way is a very odd phrasing, which I'm sure was put in place to kind of deflect scrutiny of it. So, but the question is, I guess I would be much more comfortable with methods, knowledge,
Methods of investigation,
truth, like these kinds of things, which are okay. And I don't, this is where you and I'm not sure how much we agree on this, because well, I find that it gets into these very esoteric kinds of arguments, which I'm not quite clear on every time we're talking about them. But there are more or less rigorous methods where you can have confidence that this result is based on something that has greater validity or less validity, like those kinds of judgments that are made, right? So a double-blind study of pharmaceuticals is more valid than a single blind one, or and definitely better than any of those, is better than kind of anecdotal kinds of responses of people, like these kinds of things, which I think, because we have had these discoveries that come out of that, where we're able to control nature more, like that's kind of the litmus test of it. And so with the and I agree, I totally agree that this indigenous, like there is no such thing as an indigenous or a non-indigenous thing, right? Like this is all just stereotyping that is not based upon any kind of thoughtful analysis. It's all political pandering to make indigenous people feel, the ones that are have grievances. So like that's part of it, is that there's all these neo-tribal, what I call neo-tribal elites that are kind of castigating universities for not doing the things that they think they should be doing, and the university, as part of its brand, says, okay, well, we'll do this, we'll do that, and then hopefully we'll stop being castigated as being a white supremacist institution, or whatever is kind of the allegation that's being made. So that's why there's this kind of focus on indigenous things. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because, as I think you're pointing out, is that there's not some kind of monolithic indigenous or monolithic non-indigenous. It all varies according to the particular individual and their circumstances and so on. So the whole thing doesn't really make any sense. It's all just a political kind of maneuver, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Now, about memories, right? You might say, well, this is a way of knowing. Well, it's a way of generating hypotheses. I take it that there's a fact of the matter with regard to how many people, if any people, are buried in these areas. So someone says, well, my memory is that, and at least 3, right? Well, that has to, I mean, that stands or falls according to, how many people are actually there.
Yes, but the
Right.
problem is that because of the respect and value, so we are supposed to respect and value indigenous ways of knowing. That's the directive. And so the first thing is we got the directive, which is not a good idea because it shouldn't be a top-down thing. The second thing is that this kind of idea that being told to respect and value something is a real problem, because respect and value should be, if we're going to accept that we should respect and value some things, which, you know, knowing you see, whenever I kind of have an assumption, you have this approach of undermining my assumption, which is fine because it could be an erroneous assumption, but assuming that we want to respect and value some things, we shouldn't be respecting and valuing them because we've been told this is a good thing to do. We should be coming up with our independent judgments that it is somehow we've been convinced that we should respect and value this. But because we've been told we must respect and value indigenous ways of knowing, it's coming to the point that anything that an indigenous person says, and actually it's not even all indigenous people, a selected, anointed, particular sample of the indigenous population says, we aren't really allowed to get into the disputational process of questioning whether that is actually a valid understanding of the situation. And in the case of the Kamloops school, which I just had an article came out last week, which I noticed. Well, Mark, you reposted it, but it's talking about how it's an extremely improbable hypothesis that there are 215 or 200 children that have been buried in this apple orchard. That's the hypothesis. The hypothesis is that there's, first of all, it started at 215, and then it got revised to 200 because there had been a previous excavation that had been done in the area where there were the 15 soil disturbances. So presumably because that 15 area, which was found to not have been valid, then presumably the 200 also potentially could be invalid soil, to make the assumption that the soil disturbances are actual remains of children. But there's a lot of kind of evidence that would make you question whether there are 200 buried children in this apple orchard. But because the some indigenous people have said that they remember, you know, things that other people said, or maybe they saw somehow, because it's an indigenous way of knowing, put it forward by indigenous, what's called quote unquote knowledge keepers, that should not be questioned. And that is leading us down a path which is causing terrible problems in society, but in the university, it's just impossible, because to try to raise these objections, it's not allowed. It's basically not allowed, or you're going to suffer a lot of blowback and sort of insinuation that you are an anti-indigenous person if you put forward these arguments.
So your objections to the indigenization initiatives at universities is that they tend to require academics to respect positions, theories, and ideas, and not to investigate them using their own investigative tools or methods. So these are things that are not up for critical discussion.
Yeah,
so
that's the most serious thing. But I also think that what's called indigenous ways of knowing are not up to the academic standard that should be at a university too. But then that gets into that thorny problem we were talking about earlier, which is there's a person who really thinks that these quote unquote indigenous ways of knowing are very, very valuable in trying to aid understanding. So, am I then going to say, well, no, that shouldn't be allowed in the university because that's a substandard thing. Like now we're getting into a trickier thing because it's like, okay, well, who am I to make these kinds of declarations? Which I'm uncomfortable doing. Like I have some serious qualms about, making these kind of dictates to other academics because they've come to their judgment, presumably through their own autonomous thinking processes, and they have something to, whatever. And so I'm willing to take a listen to that, but we can't have that discussion at this time because these activists, like they're doing it politically. Like they're not all these things you were talking about earlier, living the life of the mind and the intellectual character of the university and these sorts of things. They're not on board with that. Like they are activists and they think that the university is there to support a particular political agenda, and anyone who opposes it is going to be crushed and pushed out of the university. So that's a problem with the kind of the people that are now kind of seizing hold of the university. Like they don't have this idea of open inquiry. That's not what they're kind of putting forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. And as you know, one of my descriptions of it is a culture of celebration.
Yes,
right?
and I think you're really onto something with that. Like that's one of the, I've kind of adopted that a little bit, like to say, hey, Mark Mercer has identified this as a major strand of the university, and this is having a corrosive impact on what you call the culture of disputation, which should be what the university is about. And I think it's a little bit what Jonathan Haidt as well, to bring him in again. He's talking about the telos. What is I'm not sure how you feel about his characterization, but he says that, the university's telos should be truth.
Yeah.
And should not be social justice, this kind of quote unquote social justice, this kind of idea. Because if you have truth that is contradicting someone's view of social justice, then truth is going to get hammered by this kind of political
no, that's right. I'm closer to Haidt than to the culture of celebration, but again, I don't think truth is what we're after. I think what we're after is intellectual community, the exercise of our moral and intellectual autonomy. But in doing that, what we're trying to do is discover the truth. But it's like just playing checkers. It's part of the game to try to win, but it's the playing the game that matters. And so
I think you're onto something about that. I think it's the truth will come out. Like if you have as you say, the intellectual community that's honest, that's sincere, the truth will come out.
Well, I'm not so sure about that either. I would hope at least that the errors will be discovered, but I don't know.
By discovering more errors, we get closer to the truth.
Well, we get fewer errors. I think we can enjoy the game, right? Even if we lose, even if we don't just discover the truth. What we're after, of course, is a true understanding. But it's the means that really matters to us: critical investigation, discussion, experiment, reading, thinking. All of that's what we're about, rather than being a knowledge factory or a truth generating institution. But yeah, the culture of celebration, I think, is a repudiation of a culture of dispassionate disputation, a culture of investigation. It's also, as part of the culture of celebration, I mean, what's it in service to? I think it's in service to validation of certain ways of being, ideologies and the like. And so again, I think this is to co-opt the university for non-academic means. Now, of course, those on the other side can agree with me and say, well, what's so great about the academic mission? Wouldn't it be much better for universities to be put to these social political whatever ends that they serve these goals. And so that's this is one of the hard parts. This brings up the unless you wanted to react to that, another question, but I don't want to say something and move on without hearing from you first.
Well, I think, and I think you've raised this before, why can't we have several different types of universities? Those that, affirm identities and those that are disputation and dispassionate kind of inquiries.
Well, I know why we can't. I know it's totally impractical, especially.
Well, I think that we've already got, I think that that's kind of confusing that the university is, what the university is the dispassionate inquiry center. And, people can go to their therapist. They can go to, a football game where they all join with, there's all sorts of other mechanisms that exist in society to bring about those other kinds of things. And I don't think that's a good idea to water down the university.
Good, I agree with you. There are institutions already that are much better positioned to serve these interests than the university.
Yeah.
But then that brings me to the question: what about gatekeeping? Is there what are your views about how to staff the university, bring people on side? I know you've read what Sinclair McRae has had to say about these things.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting kind of discussion that, and Sinclair McRae, hopefully I've asked him to be a guest too. I'm hoping he's going to be a guest. He's a very interesting guy and has a lot of interesting things to say, and is currently involved in the battle to bring back the intellectual character of the university. But he raised a point, and I'm not sure what he still thinks about this, but that these woke, quote unquote, academics, these people are now professors who are woke. And for people who don't know what wokeism is, it's there's a number of different terms. The academic one, I guess, is reified postmodernism, but wokeism is the one that's colloquially accepted, which is identity politics that has become totalitarian. So he made this argument at a talk, and maybe he doesn't think this anymore because he got a bit of pushback on it, that these people are academic incompetence and are destroying, because of their nature of their incompetence, are destroying the foundation of the university, and therefore they should be fired. The people that are doing this, that are,
I think that's still an issue.
And that, like, for when I heard that, I was uncomfortable hearing that myself, because and I do have people who are sort of playing, like taking the tactics of the woke academics, the totalitarians, and wanting to put in some new system that uses this kind of I guess it's like the canceling and all this kind of stuff, but from an academic standpoint. And I'm nervous about it because I'd like to see, I want to get rid of the kind of draconian kind of characteristics. Like I'm nervous about this demanding for firings and all these kinds of things, which I see as one of the sort of problems. And I think that's why I think that your word disputation is such a good word, and it's such a good kind of thing to bring back, is that it's really the university's ability to protect disputation and dissent. That's kind of the problem. So I think that's really what the effort should be spent on at this stage, is you get those, and I think it was Joseph Heath referred to this as scaffolding. There's this scaffolding that universities have built up over the last 50 years. I guess it's the McCarthyism was the last real sort of assault on universities. We got scaffolding put in. We stopped the loyalty oaths and everything from being demanded. And now, of course, they're creeping back in
Yeah.
in terms of the wokeism, but we should get rid of that. Work on building up the scaffolding to protect disputation and dissent. And if we are able to do that, that should, I think, root out some of the more pernicious, totalitarian kind of elements that are in the university. That's my hope anyway, because I don't like when people start talking about, creating lists of people who do something, or, demanding people be fired and all these kinds of things. It really seems to me to be, kind of going along with this sort of totalitarian kind of tactics, when we should really be, trying to restore some of the things that prevented totalitarianism from taking root in the first place.
Well, what do you think can be done then? Do you have a program or some elements of a program that you think would not inevitably return the university or create good universities, but would stand?
I have a couple of suggestions.
Okay, because I have none. I'm pessimistic.
Okay. The first one is that faculty should elect the administration.
Okay.
That was a model that was used in the UK, I believe, in Cambridge and Oxford. Camille Paglia spoke on this, and actually Norman Finkelstein, when he went through that horrible situation that removed him from DePaul University, I think it was. Anyway, there was a conference that he was speaking at that was organized in his honor, and there was a guy from Israel, of all places, who said that his university in Israel had this structure as well, which is, and Camille Paglia said she went to, I'm not sure whether it's Cambridge or Oxford, and she said to them, like, where's your office of student support or student coddling or whatever they call it? And they said, what are you talking about? Like, we have someone who runs the cafeteria. That was the only real person that was involved in some kind of, whatever. So there was really no bureaucracy that existed in the university. It was like people ran the things that they needed to run. They weren't involved in this hand holding and, what is it? My favorite one now at Mount Royal is the Office of Safe Disclosure. Which is, you can go and complain anonymously about I just thought, oh my God. Anyway, so we had this person, when I was still employed, was invited to give a talk at a faculty council, and we weren't allowed to ask questions. So it was total like, totalitarian vice is tightening. So that's the first thing. So and we should really be thinking about this. So you elect your administrators, they do their 4-year term or whatever, and then they go back and become a member of the faculty again. That's how it should be. And then we really don't need any faculty associations anymore, because the faculty are running the university. So that would solve many of these problems. But of course, with the university corporatization, this is not going to be a model that is going to be selected. So that's the first thing, which would, I think, create
I had something along those lines. Again, I want to ask you what are the political pressures, the political mechanisms that can be used to create these changes. But anyway, I thought that the Senate, any ex officio member of a university Senate shouldn't have a vote, right? Because the deans are members of the university Senate, and they vote, but they don't enjoy academic freedom, right? They can be removed from their position for what they say or for what they do. So in fact, we have this huge block of votes. At any rate, that's one of the problems. But just in principle, the academic senate should be people who are working as academics. So even though deans might be ex officio members, they don't have a vote. As ex officio members, that just means that they can bring their expertise and their knowledge
Yes.
to bear. But I don't know how this could be done. What are the mechanisms? Well, we have the administration itself, and we have the faculty union, and we have the academic senate. These are the only power, the only loci of power within a university, and all of them have been captured. The faculty elect the administration. That's great, but it's not a project that either the Senate or the faculty association is going to take up.
Well, the faculty associations and like they should take it up.
Yeah.
Like that's the place to go. Now there's serious problems with the faculty associations.
Yeah, but they won't. Most faculty associations are more. Pardon me?
Like first of all, we have to recognize the problem. So who recognizes the problem of having the current structure of all these administrators being appointed, I guess, by the Board of Governors?
And by themselves, right? The academic administrators.
Who sees it? So let's articulate the problem and show how it has worked very, very well historically to have elected administrators. So that's the first kind of thing. Right now, that's not even on the radar of anything because people are so embroiled in their own, I'm going to say petty, but that's not the right word, but their own little, whatever. And besides, there's people getting benefits off the existing system who don't want to change things as well. But
it's the faculty associations are much more interested in social justice projects than the university as a place of intellectual inquiry.
Yeah.
At our university, the union was behind creating a EDI office, and the union got into our collective agreement that anyone who serves on a hiring committee has to take the course. Right. Yeah. Now, and this is clearly an infringement on the professional judgment of the professors, and you would want a faculty union above all to try to preserve and extend the domain of its members' judgment. So here it was contracting. Yeah. If an administration had come up and said this, the first thing the union should have said, you do that, we'll strike. Right?
Yes, so that's like the way into it. So like the faculty associations have been captured. But the reason why they've been captured is because the people either are apathetic, or they're afraid, or there has to be some way of trying to mobilize the faculty to understand the danger of what's happening. And there's a number of different fronts that can be pursued, and Society for Academic Freedom of Scholarship obviously is one of the mechanisms, which I think should become, that's another proposal that I have, which is that we at the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship spend time, and of course this is easier said than done, spend time working with members who are in universities to build up local chapters of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. So that's a way of building up faculty, getting faculty to see the danger. So that's kind of another kind of strategy, which is mobilization and organization. So that's a mechanism. Seeing the faculty associations, and this is a difficulty as well, because many people who are in favor of open inquiry are either anti-faculty association or they have given up on it. Right. And I think the faculty association is kind of an organizational tool that can be used by faculty who are in favor of open inquiry to push back against the corporatization of the university and all the managerialist kinds of things. Mm-hmm. That's like I tried, I guess it was a couple of years ago, to run a slate. A group of us got together and ran a slate of academic freedom open inquiry board members.
Right.
That was a complete failure. We weren't successful at all, but it was the first year that we'd done it.
Mhm.
And one thing I'm hoping with my case, which is such a good case because it does show like the problems, that this will maybe awaken some out of their slumber, that I was actively involved in trying to stop this kind of trend. I got pushed out, and I'm not out yet. Like I'm still got a lot. I've got a lot of fight that's still going on, and I want to let people know and to say, look, although I'm the first to go, I'm not going to be the last. And if you value a university that is an intellectual, all the things that you're talking about, Mark, like disputation and an intellectual space and exploring ideas and all these kinds of things, you are going to be gone. You will be gone too. So that has to be fought against if you value the university as an intellectual kind of space. But it's a multi-pronged kind of approach that's got to happen. And it's possible that it's lost. The battle is lost already. Like it might be too far gone to do anything. I don't know. But that's, as you said, it's the process. Like you're a great, promoter of the process. It's all about the process. It's all about, so let's get going on the process, which is, one, floating this idea of electing the administrators. I don't think that's been talked about very much. So, and I heard it, Camille Paglia and a guy from Israel was talking about it. And that's why he was saying Finkelstein got it, is that, it's because the administration at DePaul University was not elected. And that's what allowed that to happen. And if they'd had an elected administration, then that would have guarded against it. And then the chapters, like multi-level resistance at both locally at the university level, nationally at the Society for Academic National kind of thing, and then international. There's now international forces at work, and there's really good organizations like FIRE and the Free Speech Union that have much more clout. Like they have funds, they're suing, the legal realm is a bit difficult. And we've talked about this before on another, I guess it was the discussion with Paul Viminitz and Mark Hecht, the court, what role do the courts, can the courts play in this? And of course, that's a difficult one because it depends on who's taking a position in the court system. But still, that's a possibility. The kind of the rules of procedural fairness and natural justice and all these kinds of basic common law principles that have been built up through hundreds of years, those are all now being dismantled as well, which is a very, very scary kind of development.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you? When you were fired, they said no contact with students. Has that been lifted?
I don't think they said no contact with
they
students.
didn't. Okay, good.
No, I didn't get a lot of in spite of the fact that I was, chased through the university by security guards and all the kind of very draconian thing that made it seem like I was some kind of terrible threat that was there. Surprisingly, I didn't really have any restrictions placed on me as far as I can tell. And interestingly, even more interesting is the fact that although I'm no longer an employee at the institution, I remain a member of the faculty association for a year.
Right.
So I can go to all the faculty association events and meetings. And in fact, I've just put forward a proposal with St. McCrae, Kirsten Kramer, and Paul Johnston to speak on open inquiry and like the difficulties for students and all these kinds of things at the next, what's called our faculty association retreat. So that is a great thing, because I can then continue to, sort of sound the alarm about my situation with my colleagues, which if I weren't a member of the faculty association still, I wouldn't be able to. And this, of course, is going to cause, I'm sure they're going to try and change the bylaws or something to prevent me from coming there, because there's a bunch of people who have significant influence in the faculty association who have been trying for a couple of years to push me out. So they're not going to be very happy about my continued presence for the next year, because they expected that I would be that I would be erased and I would never be heard from again, kind of thing. But that's not going to happen. I'm going to try to be more like I can go to the faculty center and drink beer, and so I'm going to be going, to my usual Friday night beer drinking episodes, and I'm going to be having lunch at the faculty's, I'm going to be there. So it's not going to be easy to kind of think that I've been removed from.
Right, okay, yeah. So you're still in contact with colleagues who might not be friends, right? So you're not forbidden to speak with students. Good. But why a year? Wouldn't you be a member of the faculty union until the matter is resolved? And if it's resolved correctly, you continue to be a member of the faculty union.
Yeah, I don't know.
Between when you're no longer a member of the faculty union and the result of the arbitration.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why, but part of it is contract faculty members. So your last time you teach a course, so then from then on, you're a year that you are a member of the faculty association, a year after you taught your last class. So you taught your last class, so you're no longer an employee after that period, but you have a year that you are a member of the faculty association. I guess because most of the time things get resolved one way or another within the year is another possible reason. Of course, with mine, I just heard that we're going to arbitration in 2023.
Yeah. So it looks like there'll be a gap.
So there's going to be a gap.
Ended, and yet the arbitration won't have taken.
No, they're going to. They will pursue the grievances as long as that has to go on.
So you're not being a member of the faculty association won't affect the grievance procedure. No. Okay, good.
So that's good. That's good. But I would prefer it, as you said, that I continue to be a member of the faculty association until it's decided one way or the other. But I don't know why, but that's generally, but I assume it's because like the timing, people thought that would be enough for that to be the case, but it might have to do with contract faculty members as well. Your link is kind of, tentative, like it's not a very strong, like once you're no longer an employee, it's like, why are you still a member? Like it's like that the rationale for why you're supposed to be a member becomes less and less and less as the time goes on, that sort of thing. So yeah.
All right. And
well, Mark, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, what are the projects that you're?
Oh yeah. Well, I've got lots of projects.
I know there's the book on wokeness destroying
so
university.
I've got 3 books that I'm working on. The first one, which you're aware of, is the Woke Academy.
Yeah.
Which I actually have. This is the manuscript here.
Yeah. Well, I'm aware of that one. Yeah.
Just so people know, it does exist. It's just that I'm now going to spend the next 2 months getting it, taking Mark's, thoughts and other people, and just cleaning it up and adding new stuff to it and so on. So that's hopefully going to be done in a couple months, and then it's going to be published. And then I have the Kamloops Indian Residential School Hysteria, and I just had a article published in the American Conservative. I'm not a conservative. I'm a critic of conservatism, but because of the current climate, this was really basically the best publication for it to appear in. Anyway, I have an outline for a book that I've done on the basis of that, and looking at kind of the academic and journalistic kinds of problems that have resulted in this kind of hysteria taking root with respect to the Kamloops Indian residential school case. And then my third book is on my case, and it's called when the Academy Goes Woke. The Mount Royal University case. And I just put an outline actually up on my Facebook page. And I've got the chapters. And so what I've done is I've created the chapter kind of folders and all the stuff that goes on. Well, a lot of it's already happened already. And actually the first part is premonitions, which is, the things that were kind of showing that things were going to go this route. And the two cases there's three cases that was showing signs that this was going to go the way that it did, was the critical thinking series that the Rational Space Network held. We had a trans activist discussion, does trans activism negatively impact women's rights, with Megan Murphy. That caused a huge blow up at Mount Royal. And that was kind of one of the things that resulted in all the problems that I am facing currently. And then two other cases, the Armin Navabi case, which and both of those SAFS was involved in. Armin Navabi and the cancellation of the it was canceled originally, and then it was supposedly attempts to reschedule, but it was originally canceled. And then the Mark Hecht case, where Mark Hecht, who was a contract faculty member, wrote an article on ethnic diversity harms social trust in the Vancouver Sun. This caused a huge uproar, and actually the mob formed at that time to go after him and pushed him out. And that same mob was kind of pre-formed to take me down a couple of years later. So that was kind of a bit of a sense of, and both of those cases I pursued at Mount Royal and didn't go anywhere, and was blocked on all sorts of fronts. So those are the kind of premonitions, which I'm already very, I've got all the information about those. So it's just a matter of writing those up. But of course, the later chapters are going to depend on what happens in terms of arbitration and everything. So I have to be careful now, because I've been told that I shouldn't be doing things that could potentially taint the arbitration process, and getting into too many details about the specifics but I hope at the end of it, when it's all done, I will have the information that I can use to write up the last chapters of the case, which hopefully will be Mount Royal realize the error of its ways and becoming a culture of celebration institution instead of a culture of disputation. It has now revamped its, governance structure and policies, and gotten rid of a lot of its totalitarian bureaucratic structures. And Frances Widdowson now has a protected space where she can dispute, all these policies in the best interests of the academic kind of institution.
Good.
Well, Mark, on that note, I think that this has been a fantastic disputation. We have some points of disagreement, which I think we were able to kind of flesh out a little bit. And so, do you have any final words that you would like to say to cap?
No. I just I hope the arbitration is in your favor.
Yes. Well, I got a good case. As I said, I think Canadian Association of University Teachers is now involved, which is a very, very positive development. And I think, people should be very worried that if this is not overturned, I think it's over. I think the university as we know it is over, and people should be even if they disagree with me and they don't like me or whatever is going on in their heads about it. It's not about me.
Yeah.
It's about the university as an academic institution.
Yes. Mhm.
Anyway, Mark, this has been a great session. I'm hoping to have other philosophers, especially because the philosophers are really one of our only hope left in the university to discuss these matters. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah,
On the rational space disputations.
yeah.
Okay.